Delighted to have you with us this evening on the second season of the series of webinars, Doing What Matters in Times of Stress. A bit of housekeeping, we ask that you keep your mics muted unless you're participating in the session verbally, but we also encourage you to communicate as well in the chat. So any questions or any areas for clarification, you can also post in the chat. And so this season, the session is being hosted by the Ministry of Health Grenada, the Pan American Health Organization, and the European Union. And so we will like to acknowledge the presence of these representatives at this evening's forum, and we're going to invite them to bring remarks at the commencement of our session. So we will now invite our main host for the webinar series, and by extension this evening's session, Dr. Sean Charles, the Chief Medical Officer of the Ministry of Health, to bring remarks. So Dr. Sean Charles have worn many hats in the Ministry of Health, and as such, in his capacity today as the Chief Medical Officer, he boasts of first-hand knowledge and experience of frontline workers. He has always been empathetic towards frontline workers and other vulnerable population. And for the last 2 years, he has actively led the COVID response and have highlighted the importance of mental wellness. So let us welcome Dr. Charles to bring opening remarks. The floor is yours, Dr. Charles.
All right, thank you very much. And a warm good evening to everyone. I bring greetings on behalf of the Ministry of Health and Social Security in Grenada. And I will start by saying thank you to PAHO and all the other stakeholders who were instrumental in putting this webinar together. And my thanks in advance to the facilitators who will impart their knowledge to the audience. Now, stress is everywhere. Some might agree that more so today than ever. And we are all aware that stress adversely affects health. All right, there are proven negative health effects that result from exposure to stress. Now, learning to recognize that one is stressed and how to deal with the consequences of stress is important. But stress is chronic in many instances, and our ability to manage it over time is key to our well-being. Now, the recent events, I think, have many people on the edge, and many people don't understand that that in itself is maybe a manifestation that of the stress they have been on for quite some time. So many persons are on edge right now. To put it in a simple way, the memory of the pandemic is still fresh. Many of us have been traumatized by it, frankly, because we've seen scenes that in some instances might have been unimaginable. And the turmoil that the world is currently experiencing is ever present, whether it's in the economic sphere, whether it's natural disasters, whether it's crime and violence, or simple uncertainty about the future. And even in our day-to-day struggles, stress is everywhere. The Ministry of Health welcomes this webinar, which is designed to equip people with practical skills to cope with stress. And I think that is a very important element that every individual needs to acquire to assure his own well-being, because it seems like stress is going to be here for some time and we have to learn to deal with it. So on behalf of the Ministry of Health, I say thank you, and I say this activity is very welcome. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Chief Medical Officer. Dr. Karen Olson is the acting PAHO WHO representative for Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean country. And so coincidentally, she's also our incident commander for the COVID response for Barbados, our 13 islands, Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean countries. And so in these two portfolios, she has always emphasized the importance of managing stress. And so I welcome you, Dr. Poston, and invite you to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lawrence, and good evening to all. Good evening to Dr. Sean Charles, the Chief Medical Officer, Ministry of Health, Grenada, Ms. Janet Coto Moreno, representative from the European Union, our facilitators for the course, Drs. Khan, Weller, and also to all who are online with us this evening for this very important start of series. So just over 2 years ago, as we will all remember, even though now time seems a bit muddled, we don't remember 2 years what happened before COVID and so on March 21, 2020, the Ministry of Health Grenada announced the first case of COVID-19. And 4 days after that, the government instituted a policy which restricted movement and nightly curfews were implemented to protect communities and families. However, the country had already commenced preparations weeks prior to the announcement of the public health emergency of international concern, which was made in January 2020. As concern escalated for communities and families, we placed additional focus on the vulnerable populations, and we placed a spotlight on frontline workers, the youth, the elderly, and all those with vulnerabilities in the context of COVID-19. And we still keep that spotlight today on the vulnerable groups. So today it gives me immense pleasure to open the second in a series of webinars designed not only to increase resilience amongst the most vulnerable in our populations, but also to address self-care in those who take care of the most vulnerable. The COVID-19 pandemic has created immense psychological disturbances, and the most common stressors include fear and worry about our health and the health of our loved ones. Some persons infected may have been diagnosed with what we know now as long COVID and have many concerns, and there are still some aspects which remain unanswered at this time. Children have been impacted in that they've been absent from schools and the accompanying effects on that. And some have major examinations taking place even as we speak. There has been the loss of the collective effervescence associated with social and religious gatherings. Although small gatherings are now permitted, they're certainly not at the levels pre-COVID. And persons have relapsed, persons who have had pre-existing mental health conditions, some have relapsed, and there's been increased use of illicit substances. And some stressors are still present today. There are persons who are dealing with job losses and decreased earnings, and there is an increase in gender-based violence. So we have to find innovative ways to deal with these aforementioned stressors. We need to encourage community leaders, including our pastors and social workers. We need to continue building resilience in individuals, families, and communities. The youth are one of the vulnerable populations which are significantly impacted, and they too can be engaged to bring the message of inclusivity and resilience. Commencing today, we're implementing a strategy that has been shown to work. Doing what matters in times of stress is an evidence-based illustrated guide for coping with adversity. It has undergone extensive field testing and is available for anyone who experiences stress. It has also been adapted for the Caribbean setting and can be easily accessed online. The webinars will equip individuals with practical skills to help cope with stress, and participants will also be taught self-care techniques. I wish to, on behalf of PAHO, express our thanks to the key stakeholders participating in the event, to the Ministry of Health Grenada for taking the leading role in hosting this series of webinars, the European Union, who is a key partner in the funding of the webinars, and to the Caribbean Alliance of National Psychology Association, for whom we are privy to 2 of their excellent resource psychologists to facilitate the sessions. There are 5 sessions lasting 1 hour per week, every Thursday from 6 to 7. And trust me, this will be a worthwhile hour each Thursday for the next 5 weeks to invest. I took part in the first series, and the techniques that we have learned to help us are really amazing, and techniques that you can use throughout life, because yes, I do get stressed too. So we invite you all to reach out and to invite colleagues and your friends to these sessions. They're open to the public. And I know that you're all looking forward to participation in these sessions. And so I wish you a successful, productive webinar series. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Paulson. And thank you for sharing your experience as well in the first season. And so we now invite Ms. Janet Cotto Moreno, the head of the European Union Economic and Social Services. Ms. Cotto always expressed an interest in addressing the vulnerable population during our meetings, ensuring that there is equity and access when planning our activities. And so we welcome the European Union financial contribution and support for this webinar series. We now invite Ms. Moreno to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Representatives from the Ministry of Health in Grenada, representatives from PAHO, facilitators for the webinar today, and all persons here with us today, I wish you a good evening. It is a pleasure for me to address you at the launch of this webinar series entitled Doing What Matters in Times of Stress, because both the webinar and its topic are timely as Grenada and the region begin to emerge from the COVID-19 pandemic. After 2 years of enduring COVID-19 in all its forms, we now have a good picture of how it has affected populations psychologically. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the landscape of the health sector and the services that can be made available to the citizens. This webinar series recognizes that the mental health of persons has been impacted by the pandemic. The increase in stressors was mentioned earlier, brought about by concerns surrounding contracting the infection, preventing the infection, concerns for loved ones, changes in work-life balance, and the enormous impact on the economies. All this cannot be ignored or minimized. This webinar series will build awareness of the impact of COVID-19 on psychosocial health and will provide strategies to strengthen the response mechanisms that can be applied by a wide section of the society. Mental health is very important, and in promoting health, due attention must be paid to it. The webinar series complements the European Union's previous assistance to Grenada in the implementation of the country's national strategic plan for health and the primary health care policies since 2016. The European Union remains committed to supporting Grenada through the program Enhancing Health System Resilience to mitigate impacts of COVID-19 pandemic and to prepare for future emergencies. And we are very happy to partner with PAHO on this. I trust that all persons signing today will take full advantage of the material presented and will continue to participate in the future panels of the webinar series. I wish you an informative and fruitful session. Thank you.
Back to you, Dr.
Okay,
Lauren.
thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Moreno. And so we now invite our facilitators to take the floor. And to introduce our facilitators to you, the participants, we have Ms. Khadija Khan, who is a consultant clinical psychologist, and Dr. Peter Weller, who is a consultant clinical and community psychologist, and they're both representing the Caribbean Alliance of National Psychology Association, CANPA. And today, Dr. Khadija Khan will be hosting the meeting for today's session. She is the president-elect of CANPA and the past president of the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Psychologists. She is currently a lecturer in child psychology at the Faculty of Medical Sciences at the UWI campus, St. Augustine. And so we invite Dr. Khan to facilitate today's session. Over to you, Dr. Khan.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence. And good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to share screen with you, and we'll get started. So as mentioned, this is our second season in this webinar series. And these webinars are based off of the WHO publication, Doing What Matters in Times of Stress. And this is a WHO stress management guide for coping with adversity. So this guide is freely available online, as was mentioned before. Anybody can download it. Anybody can access the tools. There's some audio tools as well, which we'll be referencing. And the link is in the chat for you to be able to access these tools. So for today's webinar, we're going to be focusing on the first topic of grounding. But before we get into the meat of the matter, let's take a step back and let's talk about stress. So do you have stress? Have you experienced stress? Dr. Charles says stress is everywhere, and indeed, stress is ubiquitous. But what is this thing that we call stress? Well, stress refers to our response to a situation that feels threatening or a situation that feels challenging. And we feel stress when we encounter these situations that start to threaten our peace of mind. It threatens our ability to cope. And if you are experiencing stress, even right now, you're not alone. And in this webinar series, we will help you learn practical skills for dealing with stress. And every webinar will teach you about a new skill that you can add to your toolbox, to your repertoire of coping and stress management. So when we talk about stress, what are some of the things that causes stress? Now, stress can exist on a continuum. You can have major problems that elicit a stress response. So we've been living through a pandemic for 2 years and counting. You may belong to a community where there's violence. Maybe you've had a traumatic experience in your past. Maybe you're encountering an illness, dealing with a chronic illness or a serious illness. Many of our school children across the Caribbean have had to deal with no schools, and that affects the children, their parents, families, etc. So we can have these bigger categories of stress, like catastrophic events, traumatic events, big life changes and strains, or chronic stressors. But sometimes the smaller things cause stress as well. So these smaller problems, these daily hassles, for example, if your internet connection is not stable, or perhaps you go somewhere and you need to wear a mask and you don't have your mask. Or maybe you have a little tiff or little argument with your loved one, your family members. So these daily hassles and these microaggressions can also contribute to our stress burden. And sometimes they can be cumulative. And as you know, we don't, at any point in time, we're not experiencing only one stressor. Sometimes it's multiple stressors that we're facing and we're dealing with. And when our brain detects stress, that we're under stress, it causes a reaction, and we can react in many different ways. So it can affect our thoughts and feelings. So have a look at this slide and see if you can detect the ways that you respond to a stressor. Do you worry? Do you get nervous? Do you get angry and irritable? Sometimes do you feel overwhelmed, or you find yourself getting very tense and unable to stay calm? Sometimes you cry, sometimes you get restless. All of these are very typical and normal reactions to stress. Stress can also affect us cognitively. So if you find yourself being a little disoriented, you find it hard to concentrate, finding it hard to focus, maybe you're just thinking that problem over and over in your mind, it can't seem to escape your thoughts. Maybe you're becoming very hypervigilant and looking for threats everywhere. And it can also affect us physically. So maybe you get more headaches, maybe you get more aches and pains, you start to feel more tired, maybe you feel nauseous, it starts to affect your sleep. So as you can see, stress can elicit reactions in many different ways. And these are typical. Stress reactions are normal. And these thoughts and feelings and behaviors are a natural part of stress. So if they're normal, then why are we talking about it? Well, they can become problematic. So if your ability to cope is threatened and you find yourself not being able to cope, if those symptoms and reactions I just mentioned start to become overwhelming and start to affect your daily functioning, then it becomes an issue. So these problems can occur if we get hooked by them. And what do we mean by hooked? So think about, when you're fishing, when something is on a hook, when you catch that fish, it's yours, it can't get away. So the hook traps it. So in the same way, we could get hooked by these difficult thoughts and feelings that are elicited when we're experiencing stress. So let's look at an example. 1 minute you're playing with your kids and you're enjoying, you're having a good time, you're showing off your skills when you used to play football as a child. And then the next minute now you're hooked by your thoughts and feelings. Maybe there's an intrusive thought. You're thinking about what you need to do. You're thinking about a bill you need to pay. You get irritated by something. Yeah. Let's look at another example. 1 minute you're sharing a meal with your family. Everything is going well. And then the next minute you get hooked by thoughts and feelings that take you away from the moment that you're in. And so when we are hooked by these difficult thoughts and feelings, they start to pull us away from our values. Yeah. And our values are these ideas and desires about what is important to us and the kind of person we want to be. So think about the different roles that you have in your life. So for example, some among you may be parents. So think about the kind of parent that you want to be. And I'm sure some of these qualities might come to mind. You want to be loving, wise, responsible, calm, caring, protective, courageous. Think about your other roles as a spouse, as a friend, as a colleague, a co-worker, as a teacher, as a student, as somebody in a helping profession. Yeah. And when you become hooked, it starts to take you away from these values. Yeah. But you know what? Just by your attending this session, we know that you're acting on some of your values because you care about your well-being, you care about your family, you care about others. And I'm seeing in the chat that some people are sharing some of the ways that they respond to stress. But interestingly, these are some of your coping mechanisms. So what I want to ask you now is, so, when you feel stressed, somebody has said they listen to music, somebody has said they pray, they watch TV, they go for a drive, they sleep. So that might be how you cope with stress. But think back to those symptoms that I highlighted. Can you think about how you react to stress? So do you get perhaps the pain in your neck and shoulders? Do you start to feel flushed? Do you get nervous? Do you get irritable? Do you get angry? Do you start to feel overwhelmed? So what are some of your symptoms? So I see someone has said they get headaches. Yeah. So it's really important that we can identify with these. And as we go through the other webinars, you're going to hear us talk some more about how being in tune with our body is going to help us identify when we are experiencing stress. So we're seeing here headaches, so some of those physical symptoms. We're seeing anxiety, some of those psychological symptoms like thoughts and feelings. Irritable, so that's another one in the psychological category. So indeed, recognizing these is one of these steps in making us aware of how we react to stress. Someone is saying they have sudden outbursts. Indeed. Now, in stressful situations, these difficult thoughts and feelings hook us and they pull us away from our values. And then when we become hooked, our behaviors start to change for the worse. And we call these our away moves because they're pulling us away from our values. And I see somebody in the chat has said they have the sudden outbursts. And indeed, here are some away moves. So if you find yourself acting out, so maybe again, more argumentative, a little more snappy, Maybe you're starting to isolate or withdraw. Maybe you're using inappropriate humor. Has it been affecting your sleep? So you're sleeping all day or you can't sleep at all. You're eating too much or you're not eating at all. And one of the things I want you to take away is to note that there is no prescriptive way to respond to stress. It's very subjective and it's very variable. So how you respond to stress may be different to how a family member or a colleague or one of your clients might respond to stress. So that's something to think about. This stress response is very subjective and it's very variable. So in the chat, we're seeing some of that diversity in the stress response. So by paying attention to these away moves, by paying attention to our stress responses, we can recognize it in ourselves when it's affecting us, and we can also recognize it in others. So if you're experiencing this, and if you realize, wait a minute, these away moves are starting to creep in, what do we do? What can we do? Well, one of the first steps is you have to learn to focus and engage. Yeah. So when you're stressed, we find it hard to engage in life because these thoughts and feelings start to creep in and distract us. Whereas when you're engaged, you give something your full attention. So if you could learn to be more engaged and focus better, you're going to handle stress better. So let me ask you something. Think about the last time you had a drink of water. Yeah? Last time you took a sip of water. If not water, coffee, tea, juice, whatever beverage you had. Did you pay attention to it? Or did you do like most of us do? You take your sip and you move on. You go on doing whatever you're doing. So the next time you take a sip of water, I want you to pay attention to what is going on in that moment. Pay attention to what's going on inside of your mouth. So take a small sip of water very slowly. Don't swallow, hold it in your mouth. Feel the water in your mouth. Pay attention to the taste, the feel of the water around your tongue, around the inside of your cheeks. And then swallow slowly and pay attention to that as well. Pay attention to the sound that it makes when you swallow. So the idea is for us to start to be engaged in all aspects. And you could start to practice this, practice staying engaged over this next week. So for example, practice being engaged while you're talking to your family and friends. How many of us are having conversations, but we're also on the phone? We're having conversations, but we're multitasking. So the next time you sit with your family, pay attention and be engaged. So listen to their tone, watch their expressions, give them your full attention. The next time you're playing with your children, give them and the game your full attention. The next time you're doing a chore and you're washing dishes, focus on those dishes. Don't try to do other things at once, whether it's have a conversation or do something else. So think about what you can practice to help you stay engaged in this coming week. Okay. And if when you're doing this, you find yourself getting hooked, you can unhook by refocusing and re-engaging your thoughts back to the activity at hand. And in our next webinar, we're going to talk more about this process of unhooking. So in the chat, somebody is saying it's also called mindfulness. And indeed, there's overlap in a lot of these concepts. Being mindful is about staying engaged and focused in that moment as well. Yeah. Now, sometimes your feelings and thoughts can be very intense and overwhelming and overpowering. And it's very hard to not attend to them and not get caught up in them. So sometimes they can turn into an emotional storm. So when things are a little bit milder, it's easier to refocus and stay engaged. But when you get caught up in that storm, it becomes very hard to do. So when we talk about an emotional storm, we're talking about experiencing intense, difficult thoughts and feelings. And like a storm, they tend to overpower you. Yeah? Now, when you're experiencing a lot of stresses, and sometimes they may be stresses that you've experienced in your past, It could be stresses that are ongoing, like chronic stress. Sometimes these can have an impact on how your brain processes information. And in our next session, we're going to talk some more about the brain's response to stress and how we can understand that response and use it more effectively to manage stress. So one example of that is sometimes you can have an overactive brain that makes you very sensitive to stressors. So you start to exaggerate emotional cues, and it makes you more susceptible to experiencing an intense emotional storm. So something triggers you, your brain starts to respond as though this is a big stressor, and it stirs up this intense emotional storm. And it makes it very difficult now for you to refocus and engage. But the good news is that with the stress management and with effective stress management, we can train our brain to respond more emotionally, more appropriately to these emotional storms. And one tool to help us do this is grounding. Yeah. So let's learn a little bit about grounding. So let's continue with that analogy. Not that you would ever likely be in this situation, but imagine you are high in a tree when a storm begins. So in many of our countries, it's mango season, or mango season is starting to come in. So imagine you have a nice tall starch mango, Julie mango, East Indian mango tree, whatever is your favorite mango, and you are high up in that tree picking mangoes, and then a storm begins. You would want to get to the ground as quickly as possible. Forget the mangoes for now, because it's not safe to be up in that tree when this storm is raging. Underground, you'd feel much safer. Underground, you can get to somewhere else that's safe. You can also comfort others or help others more easily when you're on the ground. Yeah. So grounding is one way to help us unhook from the negative thoughts and emotions. Grounding is one way to help us come down from that emotional storm. And we can do this by engaging with the world around us and focusing on the present. Yes. So let's use another analogy. So we do not start off as blank slates. Over time, as a result of how we've been socialized or past experiences, what we've learned, our stress response starts to get programmed. And then we just are able to respond. Sometimes we don't need to think through something, we just respond. And we respond in automatic mode. And this can be very adaptive and efficient. So is there anybody who still drives a manual car, or do most of us drive automatic cars? So automatic cars are very convenient. You don't have to be shifting gears all of the time. It's a lot easier to drive, and it gets you there efficiently and effectively. However, there are some instances when being an automatic is not going to help you. Yeah. So sometimes if you have been programmed and these stresses now, that response is not an adaptive response, it can disrupt your ability to respond to a stressor in the future. So it can throw off both our nervous system, and that can affect how we adapt to this stressor. So when that happens, we can't stay in automatic. We need to shift. We need to come out of automatic and engage our gears, our manual gears. So we need to manually hack our stress response. So kick in the gears, shift to manual, find a neutral, and then kick in the gears to get back in control. And grounding is similar to that. It's taking us out of automatic, which keeps us in the storm. It's bringing us back to neutral ground to allow us to refocus and re-engage. Yeah? So grounding is a coping strategy that's designed to connect you with the present moment. It's a distraction strategy that gets you out of your head and out of those storms, and it takes you to neutral. Okay? So let's look at some grounding techniques. So there are different kinds. And depending on your own personal likes, your inclinations, you can choose the one that works best for you. So let's look at a few of these. So the first kind of grounding techniques are soothing grounding techniques. And these are when you find yourself in a lot of emotional distress. So there are a lot of negative emotions. You feel sad, angry, hurt, overwhelmed, etc. So these exercises help promote good feelings that can help those negative emotions fade away or at least seem less overwhelming. So here are just a few examples. You can picture the voice or face of someone you love. So many of us have pictures on our phones. We may have pictures on our office desk, but you can also call that picture to mind. Yeah. Practicing self-kindness or self-talk can also help. So what are some of those kind and compassionate phrases you use for yourself? Do you have a mantra that helps you? So for example, I'm having a rough day, but I'm going to get through it. I'm strong and I can move through this. I'm trying hard and I'm trying my best, and that's good enough. If you have a mantra or some positive self-talk, please share it with us in the chat. Okay? How many of you are pet owners? Sitting with your pet can also be a good grounding technique. There's a lot of research and evidence of the benefits of interacting with pets. Yeah. And maybe you can visualize your favorite place. And Dr. Charles and our other Grenadian colleagues in the meeting today, maybe you recognize this beach. Grenada is of course known for granans amongst its other amazing beaches, but this is now one of my favorite beaches in Grenada, and this is a picture of Grand Mal. So I'm sure you have your favorite place that you could picture. Calling that to mind is an effective grounding technique as well. You can also utilize a mental grounding technique, and this is when you are trying to use a mental distraction, because sometimes you can't do multiple things at once. So if you engage a distracting tool, it can help drive those distressing thoughts and feelings away. So here's some examples. And before I go to that example, I just wanted to share one of the mantras and affirmations in the chat. So Rhonda says, I am blessed, I am empowered to succeed. So thank you for sharing that, Rhonda. So back to our mental grounding techniques. So you can describe something around you, recite something, think in categories. So who remembers this game that a lot of us played in primary school? Yes. Name, place, animal, thing. So everybody gets a letter, and then you have a minute or so, I can't remember how much time, to write down a name, place, animal, thing. So we would have used it intuitively as children, but it's also a good technique for us as adults to help us ground mentally. Okay? You can also use physical grounding techniques, and this is where you engage your 5 senses to help you calm that emotional storm. So you can use deep breathing. Deep breathing is also an evidence-based technique and strategy to help not just calm your mind, but to calm some of the physiological responses that are taking place in your body. You can pick up or touch an item next to you, savor food or a drink or a scent if you like, perhaps scented candles or lighting some incense. You can try the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method, and that involves trying to look around the room and pick out 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you can smell. Yes. So it's using your 5 senses now to help distract you and bring you back to neutral. And you could also move your body, go for a walk, do some exercise, pay attention to the feelings, the sensations that are going on in your body. So all of these techniques are ways that you could use grounding to help you come out of that emotional storm and restore some calm. Now, some grounding exercises have double benefits. So you can hack your nervous system and restore the calm and balance, and you can also engage the happiness chemicals in your brain through these grounding techniques. So there are different kinds of chemicals. You may have heard of some of them. So dopamine, oxytocin, the love hormone, serotonin, which has been implicated as well in things like depression, endorphins. So this graphic shows you some examples about how some of these activities that you do can also engage your brain to release some of these chemicals. So playing with your pet, so playing with a baby, cuddling a family member, giving a compliment can help the release of oxytocin. If you want to increase your serotonin levels, exercise is a fantastic way to do that. Yeah, you want to release more endorphins, watch a funny comedy, laugh at a meme, eat some dark chocolate. So think about all these ways. Think about the things that you currently do and perhaps you want to do more of. So think of grounding as maintenance for your body and for your brain. Yeah. And so in these grounding techniques, we also want to make sure that they are effective for you, that you are tailoring them so you have the most effective repertoire, that when you need to use them and they kick into play, that you do get some benefit out of it. Yeah. So here are a couple, well, two strategies that you can use, two acronyms that we're sharing with you to help you use grounding more effectively. And so these acronyms have a decidedly Caribbean tone to them. So the first one is CAISO and IRI, and I have to credit Dr. Weller here for sharing these with CANPA and the wider audience. So let's look at CAISO first. Okay, so with CAISO, the K is knowledge. So the more you understand what's happening. So remember, we spoke about being aware of how your body responds. So that's the A, that awareness. And then you need the insight, that you appreciate why these things affect you. So what are these triggers? Yeah. And then S, the strategies and skills. So the better you can use these techniques to cope, the better they're going to be effective for you. So which of these are you going to engage? Which strategies are effective for you? Which resonates with you? And finally, opportunity. Over and over, take every opportunity. Practice makes perfect. And then the IRI, again, similar concepts. I, information, so having the knowledge and awareness about what's going on. The reflection, so even if it's after the fact, you can look back and pay attention or go back through the situation and increase your awareness about what was going on. Integrate all of that information, use your strategies and your skills, and experiment. Try different techniques and find the one that works best for you. Okay. So here are 3 tips then to get the most out of grounding and how you can really fine tune your knowledge about your stress response. So the first one is start early. Don't wait for your distress levels to get to the emotional storm levels. So try doing a grounding exercise when you first start to feel stress, when you first start to get that little frisson of discomfort, when you start to feel tense, when you start to feel a little bit anxious, a little bit uncomfortable. Yes, and choose an exercise that matches the stressor. So for example, if you're in need of distraction, then something like watching Netflix or listening to music, having a laugh by watching a comedy or something can help. However, if you realize that you are in need of some connection and belongingness, then Netflix may not be the best strategy in that moment. Then you may want to connect with someone. You may want to reach out and have a conversation. Yes. So if you are feeling a little bit tense and uneasy, then maybe a nice brisk walk, a physical grounding technique may be the thing that can work best for you there. So the idea is try them early on. Don't wait until you're in the storm. Okay. And then do a little audit. Which technique works? Which is right for you? Do you need to tweak it? And so don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say this grounding thing, I don't know now. Try a couple of the strategies. Be willing to refine them. Be willing to try a different approach. Share your techniques with others. Maybe somebody else might have an idea you want to try. Okay? And finally, practice. Practice makes perfect. Remember, we might need to reprogram our brain and to shift us out from automatic back to manual. That's going to take practice. It's not always something you can do in an instant or in one moment. So you want to practice it. And therefore, when you need to use it, you'll find that you can quicker jump into it and get the benefits you need from it. Okay. So now that we've spoken about grounding, so we laid a foundation about the different kinds of stresses you may experience, how you may respond, and how we can get hooked. And it's staying hooked that causes this negative stress response that can affect us and lead us to do more away moves, and how grounding can help us to stay focused and engaged. Let's now practice it. So we're going to end off with doing a brief physical grounding activity. So with this one, this is one of the audio files that comes with the publication. So you can also access this and listen along. So we're going to do a brief one. And so just listen along and follow with the exercise. So I'll start it. So here we go. Okay, let's try that again.
Now we'll do a short grounding exercise. We invite you to see straight. Your eyes open or closed. And notice which thoughts and feelings are present. Now slow down. Breathe. Push your feet down. Stretch your arms or straighten your back. Now notice the world around you. What can you see and hear and smell and talk? Well, now stretch your body and notice that you can choose how to move.
Dr. Khan, apologies for the interruption. The audio is a little too low for us to hear it properly. Could we ask that you increase the volume, please?
Sure. So it's actually maximum on my side.
Mhm.
And so I do apologize for that, colleagues. Let's pause it.
If you wish, we can share a link to the resource and our participants can enjoy it at another time.
Yes, thank you for that. So it was at 100% volume on my side. So we will share the links, and the link that you got, which takes you to the document, to the publication on the WHO PAHO website, also has the links to all of the different grounding exercises. So you will see an awareness exercise, and you will see links for 3 more grounding exercises. And I do encourage you to try any of them. I think you will find them very soothing, and it really does help take you out of that moment, whichever storm that's going on in your head, whether it's a small storm or whether it's a raging storm with some thunder and lightning. It does help refocus you back into the here and now. So grounding is one of those key techniques that will help us deal with stress. And the publication, as I mentioned, also teaches us about other key concepts. So we will go on to learn about unhooking, acting on your values, making room, engaging, and being kind. So we'd like you to join us next week to learn more about these techniques, and we look forward to sharing more with you then. Thank you for your attention. So now I'll hand over back to you, Dr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Dr. Khan, for such an excellent presentation. And we also wish to thank you, the audience, for participating in today's session. I think we would have ended the session with 32 participants. So we thank you for not only participating, but also for being very interactive. We learned today about away moves, how to unhook, grounding, and the use of the 5 senses. And so we look forward to next week's session, as mentioned by Dr. Khan. Just to once again reiterate that these sessions will be done weekly, Thursdays from 6 to 7 p.m. Initially, we would have had them last year, early in the day at 1 o'clock, and a lot of persons indicated that they weren't able to participate and would have loved to participate, but it was during the day when they were working. So we opted to have the sessions in the evening so that persons may not only participate as individuals, but also families. We'll be having exercises, as was mentioned today. And so we encourage the family to get together at this particular time and learn about exercises that can assist in distressing. And so we believe that no one should have to face a mental health problem alone, but more so, people who feel safe, connected, and calm and hopeful have access to social, physical, and emotional support and find ways to help themselves after a crisis situation. And this support may not necessarily be found within the government or the ministries of health, but we encourage communities to become resilient. And this support can be found within families and within communities. And so on this note, we end. We can be stronger together and look forward to seeing you next week. Over and out. Thank you.
Don't reaching out to those you trust, arms open wide, cause the signs are real. So pay attention, help is needed for friends and loved ones to fight frustration. We need your cooperation. We can all make it if we try, yeah. We're stronger together. You are not alone. Stronger together. With help, you can better. We're stronger together. Communities with strong support. We're stronger together. Oh, exercise, keep fit, eat healthy, don't quit. Please socialize, that is it. No drugs and no alcohol. Exercise, keep fit, eat healthy, don't quit. Please socialize, that is it. We're stronger together. Yeah.
So take care, everyone. Thank you for your attendance and stay safe until next week.